ESPN anchor Sage Steele is no stranger to controversy. She recently made some very inflammatory comments during a podcast appearance on Uncut with Jay Cutler. Steele flipped a conversation on how she racially identifies into questioning the blackness of President Obama. She said it was fascinating that Obama identified himself as black on the 2020 census. This was apparently a shock to Steele because, quote, considering his black dad was nowhere to be found, but his white mom and grandma raised him. Steele also blasted ESPN's parent company Disney for mandating the COVID vaccine for all employees. She said, quote, to mandate it is sick and it's scary to me. In a strange twist of fate, just days after adhering to Disney's vaccine mandate and the release of Steele's podcast interview, she reportedly tested positive for COVID, which is allegedly the reason she will not appear on air for the next at least a week, and we wish her well for that. Like many NBA players, Steele was hesitant about getting vaccinated until their respective employers announced consequences for anti-vaxxers. The NBA has rolled out a list of restrictions for unvaccinated players, which includes a loss of pay for games missed for COVID-related issues. Since the league rollout of these restrictions, the NBA vaccination rate has skyrocketed to 95%. But still, some lawmakers want to put pressure on any holdouts. Just yesterday, New York State Senator Brad Holman introduced legislation to prevent out-of-town entertainers and athletes from working in New York City if they don't have the vaccine. The senator called out athletes like Washington Wizards' Bradley Beal and said, get jabbed or get out of town. And just today, the Los Angeles City Council passed a mandate that would require proof of vaccination for anyone entering businesses, including the Staples Center, which is home to the Lakers and Clippers. Joining us to discuss is host of the Jemele Hill is Unbothered podcast on Spotify, Jemele Hill. So Jemele, I'm not even going to form a question out of this. What is your response? What is your response to what she was saying? I mean, it's so confusing to me. Like, so if someone raises you, you automatically become that race of a person you have to identify with? I don't understand it.
Well, thank you for having me, as always, Charles. I think there was a lot of levels to what she said. Obviously, having worked at ESPN for 12 years, I know how the company operates. And when those comments that she made with the vaccine, let's start there first. My guess is that probably didn't play over very well inside the building because that's a direct criticism of company policy, and companies usually don't tend to like that when you do that in a public fashion in which she did, especially with the issue that's been sadly as polarizing as being vaccinated. So then that's one layer of it. And then you move to the next layer is talking about her mixed racial identity. And I think the part that set off the alarms and the trigger warnings in our community in conversations that I've had, with friends and people have been having on social media, it wasn't that there's an expectation with people who are biracial to choose. I mean, I know there are some people who feel like you should, and I understand that, but I very much understand the premise of you were raised by two people, you came into this world through two people, and you feel as if I don't want to pick one side or the other. I completely understand that. The part that really alarmed folks is then going on to say, well, I don't understand why the president, the former president, or I'm fascinated by the former president choosing to identify as Black when his Black dad wasn't even around. So then that reads to me like, one, a shot at being Black, and two, a shot at Black men. So it's like two very obvious shots rolled into one, which is why I think she got a lot of the smoke that she got. And I think beyond that, the third level, which you didn't mention, is what she said about women in our industry and about the appropriateness in how we dress. And there have been a number of cases, situations where women who work at networks have complained, rightly so, about being harassed. That's been a really big issue in our business. It's been an issue for female sports journalists who are covering teams and leagues who have experienced the same sort of harassment. And it's times like these, Charles, well, I have to, remind people is that whether you are black or a woman, whatever marginalized group you fit in, the patriarch doesn't need your help. They don't need you to carry the water for white supremacy. They don't need you to carry the water for misogyny. And it felt very much like she was doing that, especially knowing in our business how tough it is on women. It's like she added to what's already difficult for a lot of us to try to thrive and survive in this industry. And it was just really disappointing to see a woman who has been the face of ESPN's Women's Summit for years, that I've been a part of that Women's Summit for years, to then sort of buy into what we hear all the time, the criticisms, as if it allows people based off how we dress, that even though she said, I'm not saying that they harass, anytime you start a phrase with I'm not saying, usually the next thing that follows, you're exactly saying that.
You're saying it. Right. So let's flip a little bit over to the NBA. They mandated that players had to get the vaccine. Vaccination rates went up to 95%, but it's not a total, slam dunk, to use the basketball metaphor. So there are still some holdouts. Do you believe that we're going to get to a situation where one of these or some of these really, well-paid, very wealthy, very successful athletes is going to get in a situation where they're not going to be able to work and play for these teams? Particularly with the legislation that's being passed in New York and the ordinance being passed in L.A.
Well, I'm sure LeBron James breathed a sigh of relief because the Lakers are 100% vaccinated, so that won't impact them for sure. But yeah, these remaining holdouts, it's going to be interesting to see what they decide to do. I mean, you look at somebody like Kyrie Irving, who plays for the Brooklyn Nets, and as of now, he's not vaccinated. And if he continues to stay that way, he will lose $381,000 per game. And we saw Andrew Wiggins, who was one of the holdouts. He has since gotten his first shot because at the end of the day, he's making $30 million a year. He's not trying to give up half of it to be sitting out the games that will be played in San Francisco, where they have this vaccine mandate that is similar to New York and now Los Angeles. So, we know that money talks, and that if that is the coercion that the league needs, they're going to use all the leverage that they can. And what I would hope these holdouts would think about is at this point, we have 350 million people in this country who have been vaccinated, at least received one dose. Worldwide, we're talking about 5 billion. And look, LeBron James is the most influential, important player in the NBA. Do they really think that LeBron James is going to put something in his body that is going to jeopardize his future? And I understand that we're learning a lot of things in real time, and I would encourage all of them to please consult with your physician. But the things that we've been hearing from some of them who remain hesitant are not things that are logical. And Andrew Wiggins talked about how he had a bad reaction, I believe, to some Tylenol, and that is what prevented him from being vaccinated. That's fear. That's understandable. That's normal. However, the Golden State Warriors had him meet with a doctor that was supposed to kind of assuage those fears so that he wouldn't feel that way. And he still left that conversation saying, I'm not going to be vaccinated. The money is what pushed him over the edge. And I would just hope in some of these locker rooms that players are having conversations with each other. They don't need to look to Facebook. They don't need to look to, other quote unquote ways to inform themselves. And God knows what that means when people say they're doing their own research. You literally can look to your teammates. You've not heard of one single case in the NBA where somebody has had a horrible reaction. There may have been people who may have felt lethargic or may have felt those kind of minor side effects that come with being vaccinated. You have not heard of one worst case scenario situation that's happened with an NBA player who's been vaccinated. And to me, with that evidence right before your fingertips, with the fact that you're a professional athlete who has access to the best doctors in the world, that should be enough to continue to convince you. And do you want to lose out on direct deposit? I would think not. Money's real important to a lot of y'all in the league, because certainly they spend a lot of it and they make a lot of it. So I would imagine you don't want to miss any checks over something that's entirely preventable.
If you try to cut my check in half, I'm going to get 5 shots. Jemele Hill, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Hey, give me all the shots, a drip, an IV. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.